Let's go. What up, y'all? Happy Sunday afternoon. We're going to do something a little different today. We're going to be doing Bret Easton Ellis's Lunar Park. And I think that you all will enjoy this one. I enjoyed it. This is a fun novel. This is our first dive into a really contemporary novel. I mean, it was published in 2005, but this is our first dive into something totally contemporary, and I would call this probably a postmodern novel. I mean, it's really a novel that fits right into the age of the war on terror, right? Published in 2005. This is a 2006 edition. I first read this book in, let's see, 2000, I think 2013. I remember seeing the book when it first came out at a Waterstones when I was in grad school. Yeah, I was in grad school in Belfast, and I remember seeing this book on the shelf. It was brand new. I should have gotten it then. Instead, I got it a few years later. Read it in 2013, and I read it again yesterday. And what's up, Crispy? And so, shouts out to Crispy. Look, I'm representing you today. See, shouts out to Crispy with my Bushmills coaster for my GMO Red Bull here. What's up, Ellie? What's up, Jason? What's up, Derek? So yeah, I hope everybody's having a good Sunday afternoon, and hopefully we'll get a little bit of a crowd in here. If not, if you guys if you're watching this later, please make sure that you obligatory, right? Smash that like, okay? Leave a comment down below. My last video that I did the other day on Joyce Carol Oates' short story was privatized by Le Algoritmo, and then mysteriously put back up again the next night. And I think it happened to a couple other people. Must be the bots coming for us or a glitch or something. So please make sure that you smash the like and leave a comment while you can, because I got half as many views from that one because they took it down for a day. But hopefully it'll catch back up. And I thought that was a pretty good analysis. It was pretty fun. Again, it was on Joyce Carol Oates and her short story. I don't want to name the short story now because I feel like that might have been what triggered the algorithm. So just go back to my last stream there, and that was a pretty not contemporary, but a dive into modern literature. Short story. We've done some contemporary poetry, right? Remember we did Yusef Kumanyaku and Vietnam War poetry. Of course, he's still living, still writing. He's probably in my opinion, the greatest living poet, Yusef Kumanyaku. But now, shouts out to Countess out there, Countess Powers. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you. Hey, everybody, what's up? So, yeah, today we're going to dive into this postmodern war on terror era Bret Easton Ellis novel, Lunar Park. And I got to say, this book is amazing. It's hard to sum it up or describe in a short soundbite, I guess. But it is a mock memoir. It is a meta narrative. It's a family drama. It's an autobiography about addiction, fame, and celebrity, and the glitterati or the neo Brat Pack. It's a ghost story. It's a story about a literal demon, and it is especially a book about disassociation, and we're going to get into that and what that means. I mean, I can't think of a book. We've done a lot of streams here, you guys, where Gnosticism and Gnostic symbolism and D.I.D seem to be part of. I mean, the biggest one was obviously Frankenstein. That was our sort of proto D.I.D analysis, right? If you go back and watch that Frankenstein analysis, I mean, that's what that one is about. But this one, I haven't read another contemporary book or postmodern novel that deals with that in such a way as this. So let's just dive into it. Again, it was published in 2005, and Bret Easton Ellis was born in 1964. He's still writing. He's coming out with his latest book, Shards, next January. Of course, he I think he does that he reveals like a chapter every week or so on his own podcast. If you've ever listened to the Bret Easton Ellis podcast, it's pretty interesting. And of course, Bret Easton Ellis is most known for American Psycho, right? American Psycho, the film American Psycho. A few of his movies have been made. I mean, books have been made into films, right? Rules of Attraction, Less Than Zero. Less Than Zero was published while he was still a student at Bennington College in Vermont. Of course, Bret Easton Ellis sort of hit it big with his. He sort of hit it big while he was in school because he was part of a literary circle that was based around Bennington. With hold on, I'm just fixing some things here. You guys forgive me. There we go. Make sure that's plugged in. With Donna Tartt, the Mississippi writer Donna Tartt, and we talked about last time briefly. If you haven't read her, The Goldfinch, I love the book, The Goldfinch. And also Jay McInerney, who is still around. Jay McInerney wrote the book Bright Lights, Big City. He's quite a few years older than Bret Easton Ellis, but still part of that same neo literary brat pack that was sort of hit it big in the mid 80s. Their books typify the Reagan era going into the fear, loathing, and sort of psychic malaise of the 80s into the 90s. I got a copy of Less Than Zero here and Rules of Attraction. We're not going to be American Psycho plays a huge role. All of his books play a huge role in this book because of the way the narrative is structured. In fact, Patrick Bateman plays a major role literally in this book. And so the question becomes whether this book is, I would say a person reading this would question whether the book was true or not. And my answer to that would be that the book is true, right? Remember Shakespeare, Henry VIII, all is true. The book is true. I don't know if it's factual or not. I think that it takes on a narrative structure and then a meta narrative structure where we have the literal and the figurative sort of coalescing into something altogether different, where things may not be factual, but they are certainly true. I'll get into what that means as I go on and get into my sort of thesis statement for this novel. I didn't know that Jay McInerney, who wrote Bright Lights, Big City, and who plays a role in this, he is sort of the Laertes role in this. Is he Laertes? No, he's the Horatio. He's sort of the Horatio role in the Hamlet meta narrative of this novel. Bret Easton Ellis himself is the protagonist, and one questions at times whether he is Prince Hamlet or whether he is King Hamlet. His father, who is not in the book alive, but plays a major role in the novel, in the structure of the novel, especially plays the King Hamlet-esque ghost who haunts the protagonist in the book. And we also have Ophelia characters. So the book is working on sort of three different levels. Number one, it's Bret Easton Ellis' own story mixed in with the story of Patrick Bateman. It's also the story of a writer. And when we get into the idea of the haunted writer dealing with his son, we can't help but notice the parallels with The Shining, which there are obvious parallels, especially the idea of disassociation. And to really, I think the best analyses of The Shining, you can skip through pretty much all analyses of The Shining, except for the two key ones that I think really get at the meaning and the true meaning of The Shining, which would be, of course, our homie Jay over at Jay's Analysis and Rob Ager, who both have covered The Shining in depth better than anybody else. Also, you can, if you don't have Jay's Esoteric Hollywood book, what are you even doing, right? Get his book. Jay has also talked about American Psycho, the film, pretty in depth in a couple of streams with Jamie, right? Shouts out to Jamie Henshaw on her channel. And but I think that this book usually goes by the wayside, and for a number of reasons. I think that in the eyes of most readers or critics, this book is certainly outside the purview of the normal Bret Easton Ellis book. I also think that it's the book is funny, it's incredibly sad. And I got to say that it does pack a pretty emotional wallop. And there are chapters in this book that I think are unparalleled, especially in modern literature, modern American literature. And I think that Greenfeather says Hendo should do a Lovecraft analysis of one of his stories. Yes, great idea. I will. TGF, especially just because you asked, my homeboy out there, TGF, the Green Feathers. I will definitely dive into a Lovecraft story and Lovecraft analysis. Thank you for that suggestion. There are chapters in this book that are unparalleled in contemporary literature, especially modern literature, except maybe by Don DeLeo's White Noise, which we also need to do. I can't find my copy. I've read the book 4 times, and I don't know where the book is. It's somewhere. It's in a box somewhere or something, along with a bunch of other prose. But there are also obvious parallels to White Noise, Don DeLeo's White Noise, because we have the story of a writer who's facing a sort of psychic malaise, and that is partly brought on by exterior events and the way society is going, especially in the 2000s. Although White Noise takes place in the 80s, or at least it was published in 85. Was a National Book Award winner, I think, or a Penn Faulkner Award winner. Anyway, we'll do that next time. So the way that the book works, again, I was saying that it works on sort of 3 levels. There's Bret Easton Ellis' story himself, Bret Easton Ellis' story of his own celebrity. There's also The Shining and Hamlet. Hamlet plays a major sort of parallel role. Luckily, we've done Hamlet on this channel. And there are also parallels to, I couldn't believe it reading this book. This is the way that intertextuality works, right? Excuse me, folks. That, you read and you're dialed in, and everything connects to everything else. It's sort of, we just did Moby Dick. We just did Lord of the Flies, and then Moby Dick and Lord of the Flies. They're on two adjacent pages in this book. I mean, they're right there. And then Lord of the Flies turns into one of the sort of sidebar narratives, as we'll see within the book. And I couldn't believe it, right? So everything that we're doing sort of leads us on to the next thing. So I'm glad that we've done those. I'm glad that we did the Hamlet analysis. Go back and check out my Hamlet analysis if you haven't seen that, especially if you're watching later. Let's see. Something just came in. We just got a fat PayPal just came in. Let's see. Thank you to Derek, who drops $5. Appreciate you, homeboy out there. Thank you for dropping that $5. Really appreciate you. That helps me to keep going here. And you guys, if you're watching this now or you're watching this later, please check out the links that my friends and my homies are dropping in the live chat, and also that are in the video description and in the channel description on the About page. You can support me via PayPal, Cash App, or Venmo. Cash App is great because you get to leave a message on there, so that's cool. And then pretty soon, as I said, we'll get up there and we'll get our super chats going, and we can do that while we go. All right, so I blabber on so much that my cigarette goes out. All right, you guys. So let's dive into this novel. So first of all, what is the story about, just on a basic level? Well, it's about Bret Easton Ellis, or a character named Bret Easton Ellis, who is a famous writer, famous author, famous screenwriter, and who the opening chapter sort of sets us up with all of his sort of troubles with addiction and life that he's gone through being a celebrity in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. He takes us through this in detail. He's often funny when he talks about this, but it's you can't help but, oh, dog's coughing over there. You all right, baby? Sorry, y'all. It's poignant. The final, like I was saying earlier, the final pages of this book are so strong and so they really lead you like you're riding this wave up to what the degenerate Hunter S. Thompson called the crest of a high and beautiful wave. And luckily, we ride the wave right up to the top of the climax, and the book ends right at the peak. And I can't really describe to you how powerful the end of this book is, because the the structure of the narrative changes, the diction changes. There are about two sentences over the course of 3 or 4 pages, and it almost becomes beat like, right? We'll go back to our beat generation analysis, right, of Jack Kerouac. And it's really amazing, and it ends in an extreme. The last paragraph of this book is really, really powerful. So again, I'm not here to suggest anybody read. That's why I'm here analyzing the text. You may have already read this book, but Ratsky says he read this book before. Yeah, and you may like out there, you may like this book, you may not like it. I love it. I love this book. I appreciate it, and it really draws me. I mean, I reread the book in a day, and it really drew me in, and it spoke to me. It's very powerful. So let's dive into the text as we always do. Again, we're reading Lunar Park by Bret Easton Ellis. And I will, as we go on, I will tell you what that title means. Of course, he never says what the title means in the text, but we can figure out what it means. The book is dedicated to Bret Easton Ellis' father, Robert Martin Ellis, 1941 to 1992, and Michael Wade Kaplan. It's interesting that it's dedicated to his father because he plays such a problematic role in the text. There are 3 epigraphs here. One, Thomas McGuane from Panama. The occupational hazard of making a spectacle of yourself over the long haul is that at some point you buy a ticket too, right? That's almost Hunter S. Thompson-esque, right? Buy a ticket, take the ride. Second epigraph, John O'Hara. People who have made up their minds about a man do not like to have their opinions changed, to reverse their judgments on account of some new evidence or new arguments. And the man who tries to compel them to change their minds is at least wasting his time, and he may be asking for trouble. Third epigraph from Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 5. From the table of my memory, I'll wipe away all trivial fond records, all saws of books, all forms, all pressures past, that youth and observation copied there. So this is, again, this is the story of Bret Easton Ellis. He's dealing with his past, his recent past, right, as an addict and celebrity. And then he decides to move home with the mother of his child, whom he contested, but then has a DNA test. There's a little part in there where he blames Keanu Reeves as being the real father. There are a lot of names dropped in this. And he decides to move in with her in a suburban town, couple of hours away from Manhattan. Now, Bret Easton Ellis is, if you know, right, sort of spends his time between Los Angeles and Manhattan. And his books are very, Less Than Zero is very Los Angeles. American Psycho is very New York. Quintessential cities, right? As he sort of gets what does Hamlet say, this quintessence of dust in terms of the city and the time and the place. And yes, the book is inspired by real events. And the question actually is whether the story is real or not, whether it did actually happen. And my thesis for this novel is that the book is not necessarily real or factual because it's satirical. The name changes, a lot of Hamlet references, but I think that the book is true. And he goes home to see his family. He's trying to sort of deal with being a writer, and he's trying to shift into being a father and being a husband. His wife in this is a famous actress, and what ends up happening is he's haunted by the specter of both Patrick Bateman, who shows up in the guise of a grad student, because he has a part-time job teaching at a local college, and also by his father. And there is and one of the main characters in this book is a thing called a turby, which is like a Furby. And it's kind of funny. I mean, because all right, so here's what happens. So he he has like a Halloween party at his house, and all these people come over, and the kids are upstairs. And he ends up, still sort of getting into his bad habits. He's hitting on on this grad student who is doing her, or a PhD student who's doing, I guess, her thesis on, or a dissertation on him. And he's just a kind of a he's a low down celebrity kind of, kind of scumbag, I guess. Um, but he's funny, and he has a sense of humor. And Jay McInerney comes over. These people come over, but he has to buy his daughter a present. And the thing that year is kind of like Beanie Babies or whatever. The thing that year was this like thing called a Turby, and so he can't find one. They're totally sold out. So he gets his drug dealer, this guy Kentucky Pete, to go find him a Turby. The Turby is like this black furry little bird creature with like an orange beak and yellow eyes. Remember the yellow eyes in Frankenstein? A couple of things that we've read have the yellow eyes. And the daughter, and it talks. You flip a button and it talks. Well, there's a point where like he goes upstairs and like it does that Stranger Things thing where like the wall sconces start lighting up when he walks past, and we know right away that there's a demon. We know that something is trying to communicate with him through the electrical signals in the house. The house becomes haunted by a demon and by the demons of his own past, because the house is a lot like the fall of the house, the fall of Usher, right, in Poe. Go back to our Poe analysis. We've done Poe as well. We've covered a lot here, guys, in just a couple months. Um, and then anyway, he sees the Turby. The Turby starts like it's alive basically, and it like scratches at the door, and getting bigger and more active as the book goes on. But we can tell that this stuffed animal, this robotic stuffed animal, is animated by some demon. And there's also a question about the family dog. The family dog doesn't trust him, doesn't like him, and and we know that on a couple of levels, like we know that the demons of his past are coming alive. He's sort of manifesting the demons of his past. We also know right away, if you're in this audience, right, and you're you know bays to all this stuff, you know right away that what it's going to be is when he starts disassociating, right? We know that it's going to be because of a trauma that happened in his past, and that comes to light throughout the book. His dad was abusive, and he never states exactly how, but you figure it out with the imagery in the book. Um, at one point, there's a Lost Highway-esque scene where he sees a videotape of his dad on his final night of his life, and he realizes that it's not a videotape. He's seeing it through the eyes of this guy, and the guy is a kid, basically, student who shows up at his Halloween party, and he's dressed as Patrick Bateman. He looks exactly like Patrick Bateman, but he also looks like himself. He looks like a younger version of himself. And we realize later on that the Turby has been brought into the house by him, because not only did he literally bring it into the house, but when he asked Kentucky Pete to buy the Turby, he found it from, it turns out, the Patrick Bateman character, whose name is Clayton, and who drives a car exactly like his dad, and that basically he bought it from himself. Okay. And he starts to lose his mind. He starts to freak out. And of course, everything that he does is seen in a like in a double speak, because his wife thinks that he's just, abusing drugs and alcohol, and that he's lost his mind, and he has lost his mind. He's mad. And the question becomes like whether he really did all this stuff, or he's really seeing this stuff, or whether he's being gang stalked and gaslit, because the furniture moves around in the house. Classic gaslighting, right? But it turns out, I mean, I would say that his dissociation in the book is a result of his traumatic, either traumatic ritual abuse or just his psychosexual trauma when he was young, and that his mind splits at the point where he's trying to split his own personality in a conscious way because he wants to be a husband and a dad, but it's a split from who he's been all this time. And that all of the events in the novel are both not real because he's imagining them, and also real because he's making them happen, because it's his own self doing them, even though he's outside of himself. And as we'll see later on in the book, um, there are parts where he starts talking in the second person and then in the third person, and he says he basically gets the dark passenger, right? The Ted Bundy-esque serial killer dark passenger, and there is a serial killer in this book on the outskirts, and we have to decide whether he himself is doing those things or they are a premonition, or whether they are a some sort of fractured prism of his past. And then we realize that he's made these things come alive because he's being haunted by the character of Patrick Bateman, and then he has to kill Bateman. And spoiler alert, he kills Bateman in this book, standing on a burning pier. Um, and so, again, my thesis is that all of this is all of the events in the novel, even though it's a mock narrative and a satire on the age, on the contemporary era, especially on the war on terror era, and on a long arc of celebrity, the things in the book are true. So I'll get into what that means. So the book begins with the quote, "You do an awfully good impression of yourself." Well, there you go. Right. There's dissociation right at the very beginning. You do an awfully good impression of yourself. This is the first line of Lunar Park, and in its brevity and simplicity, it was supposed to be a return to form, an echo of the opening line from my debut novel, Less Than Zero. People are afraid to merge on freeways in Los Angeles. Since then, the opening sentences of my novels, no matter how artfully composed, have become overly complicated and ornate, loaded down with a heavy, useless emphasis on minutiae. My second novel, The Rules of Attraction, for example, began with this. And it's a story that might bore you, but you don't. So remember, Rules of Attraction, if you read that, um, begins completely in media res, and is a completely chaotic story of multiple personalities, literally multiple personalities, and degradation on in a northeastern college campus. The following is from my third novel, American Psycho. "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," is scrawled in blood red lettering on the side of the chemical bank near the corner of 11th and 1st. 11th, remember? 11th in the occult. And is in print large enough to be seen from the back seat of the cab as it lurches forward in the traffic leaving Wall Street. And just as Timothy Price notices the words, a bus pulls up, the advertisement for Les Mis on its side, blocking his view. But Price, who is with Pierce and Pierce, and 26, who doesn't seem to care because he tells the driver he will give him $5 to turn up the radio, "Be My Baby" on WYNN, and the driver, plaque on American, does so. And then he goes into his other novel, Glamorama. Now, so far he's narrating his own life and commenting on what his own life was, right? He goes on in the first chapter, he says, there are parts of this that I can't even read because they're so, but let me skip to page 12, where he says, "I did guest spots as myself on Family Ties and The Facts of Life in Melrose Place in Beverly Hills 902 and Central Park West. I dined at the White House in the summer of 1986, the guest of Jeb and George W. Bush, both of whom were fans. My life was an unfolding parade, made all the more magical by the constant materialization of cocaine. And if you wanted to hang out with me, you had to carry at least an 8-ball. And soon I became very adept at getting off the impression that I was listening to you, when in fact I was dreaming about myself, my career, the money I'd made, the way my fame had blossomed and defined me, how recklessly the world allowed me to behave." And that's true. All that stuff is true, by the way, that I just read. See, all of the back events are true. He really did. They were fans of his, right? Whenever I revisited LA over the Christmas holidays, I usually chalked up 4 or 5 moving violations in the cream-colored 450 SL my father had handed down to me, which will play a major role in this. But I lived in a place where the cops could be bought off, a place where you could drive at night without headlights, a place where you could snort coke while getting blown by the B-list actress, a place that allowed the 3-day smack binge with the upcoming supermodel in the 4-star hotel. It was a world that was quickly becoming a place with no boundaries. It was dilaudid at noon. It was not talking to anyone in my immediate family for 5 months. So again, break from his family, right? Depravity and degradation and the celebrity, which he's coming to terms with here. Okay, this is still the first chapter, which is setting up the book, and the book shifts. There's a split in the book, and there's a total shift, but we have to get through this first chapter. This is on page 16. He says, what I didn't and couldn't tell anyone was that writing the book had been an extremely disturbing experience. It's about American Psycho. That even though I planned to base Patrick Bateman on my father, something else took over and caused this new character to be my only reference point during the 3 years it took to complete the novel. What I didn't tell anyone was that the book was written mostly at night when the spirit of this madman would visit, sometimes waking me from a deep Xanax-induced sleep. When I realized to my horror that this character wanted from me, I kept resisting, but the novel forced itself to be written. I would often black out for hours at a time only to realize that another 10 pages had been scrawled out. My point, and I'm not quite sure how to put this, is that the book wanted to be written by someone else. It wrote itself and didn't care how I felt about it. I would fearfully watch my hand as the pen swept across the yellow legal pads I did the first draft on. I was repulsed by this creation and wanted to take no credit for it. Patrick Bateman wanted the credit. And once the book was published, it almost seemed as if he was relieved and more disgustingly satisfied. He stopped appearing after midnight, gleefully haunting my dreams, and I could finally relax and quit bracing myself for his nocturnal arrivals. But even years later, I couldn't look at the book, let alone touch it or reread it. There was something, evil about it. My father never said anything to me about American Psycho, though oddly enough, after reading half of it that spring, he sent my mother a copy of Newsweek with the cover that asked, over the angelic face of a baby, "Is your child gay?" unaccompanied by any kind of note or explanation. Now, that right there, right away, right, this audience will understand right away what that means, right? What it means is that big time shouts out to Jamie Hanshaw at Jamie's channel, right? And to our buddy over there, Jay Dyer, at Jay's Analysis, because Jay and Jamie have covered this ad nauseum, right? How certain works of art, books, films, musicians will discuss how they became sort of a passenger in their own body, and they were inhabited by some sort of spirit who is pushing them to create whatever it is, right? Almost to create a golem. And we've seen this endlessly. We see this, right? We see it every time a singer or a celebrity has like an alter ego. We see it every time it seems that a celebrity breaks and goes into a literal altar, right? Remember Britney in the Diane Sawyer interview where her altars start appearing, coming to the surface. We've seen this in the talks about the serial killers, especially remember Jay's series about serial killers, where he went in depth talking about Dahmer, Ted Bundy, Otis Toole, Henry Lee Lucas, our buddy Henry Lee Lucas, not our buddy, George W. Bush's buddy. That's my buddy, Henry Lee Lucas. He's a good boy. But what I'm saying here is that this is just another confirmation of a dark work. And what is darker than American Psycho? Now, my thoughts about American Psycho, I've read the book and I've seen the film probably 4,000 times, you guys. I mean, I've seen that movie so many times, and my thoughts about the movie kind of have changed over the years. I mean, obviously, when I first saw it is when it first came out. I was 20 years old, and I thought, oh, this is real. Like, he's actually doing this. He's actually a serial killer, right? And then it changes to, okay, this is obviously satire, and because this guy lives in this world of illusion where everyone mistakes everyone for everyone else. Bateman is called by like 12 different names throughout the movie, right? Halberstram, right? Right. Burning the midnight oil, Mr. Smith. I mean, he's called by so many names and he never corrects them, right? Even at the climax, the lawyer won't believe that he's done these things. And it's a satire, right? Because he wants to feel, and actually Ellis even says in the book that he does a lot of these things because he wants to feel. So he lives in this sort of psychopathic zone where of pure nihilism. But then I sort of shifted my opinion on American Psycho, where I think that it is both literal and satire. It's literal and figurative in that the character is actually doing the things that he's doing in the movie. I think he is actually a serial killer, but it's also satirical, if that makes sense. And you might ask, like, what does that mean? Well, I think it's like a character living his own novelization of himself, and he's doing the things that he's doing because we know that these psychos do this. We know that all you got to do is look up. Remember the guy who owned the top 12 stories of the what's the tallest condo building in New York? It's in that tall, thin building, and it's right by Central Park, where Bateman lives. And it turns out, and he was a hedge fund guy, and it turns out that he had a dungeon, right? And he was doing all those depraved, satanic things. We know, if you've ever seen the Ronald Bernard videos on YouTube, right? You can look up how the economic hitmen sacrifice to BAAL and all this stuff. And I think that this character, it only speaks to the truth of what these people are involved in and what they do, but it's also a satire, if that makes any sense. And I think that this book is about the fact that he's conjured this demon who inhabits him and also sort of inhabits the spirit of his father, because he continuously says that Bateman is based on his own dad, right? I think his dad was involved in like high stakes real estate speculation or something like that. But anyway, he goes on to say on the same page, but it was the summer of Jeffrey Dahmer, the infamous homosexual cannibal serial killer from Wisconsin, and I became positive that he had been under the influence of American Psycho. There you go. Since his crimes were just as gruesome and horrific as Patrick Bateman's. And since there had been a serial killer in, of all fucking places, Toronto, for Christ's sake, who had read the book and based 2 of his murders on scenes from it, I made a number of frantic, drunken phone calls to my agent at ICM, as well as to my publicist at NOF, to make sure this wasn't the case. It wasn't. And yes, it was true. I gained 40 pounds. I was so sunburned and fat that if you had drawn a face on a giant pink marshmallow and plopped it in front of a laptop, you wouldn't have told the difference between the 2 of us. Notice his continuous narcissism here. And then the summer was interrupted by a phone call in the middle of the night. This guy was found naked by the 22-year-old girlfriend in the bathroom floor of his empty house in Newport Beach. That was all we knew. He goes on to tell a story about Keanu Reeves, how he thinks Keanu Reeves is the actual father of his son. His dad died, and we stored this is very Don DeLeo-esque right here. And we stored the ashes in a safe deposit box in a Bank of America on Ventura Boulevard next to a dilapidated McDonald's. What? I mean, if that doesn't capture the postmodern, pre-Karanka, post-war on terror, fear and loathing, psychic malaise of an entire, generation, I don't know what does, right? His dad dies, and he stores his ashes in a Bank of America Boulevard next to a dilapidated McDonald's, right? This is like consumerism in extremis. He says, agreed to cut it, much to the chagrin. There's a part where he's talking about cutting parts of his book, The Informers. Agreed to cut it, much to the chagrin of the reporter who had endured a week with me in Richmond, Virginia, where I supposedly was hiding out at a friend's house. Actually, I was secretly attending the Canyon Ranch that had recently opened up there to get in shape for the brief book tour I promoted to do for NOF to support the Informers. He goes on to talk about his son, Robbie, and how his son, There were anxieties, irrational fears, attachment disorders, tantrums at school. He wouldn't let people touch him. And then he says, the parties I attended during the following years, but at that moment in the evening when someone brought out the cocaine, which had admittedly become nightly by that point, fragments of this hidden life would tumble teasingly from my mouth. So he becomes a different character. Let's see. There was a BBC documentary about my life thus far at 33. Illuminate confirm. It's title taken from American Psycho's last line. This is not an exit. The Bret Easton Ellis story. If you haven't seen that, it's on YouTube. You should check it out. It's called "This Is Not an Exit." It's the story of it's Bret Easton Ellis prior to the making of the film American Psycho. The fame, the excess, the fall off, the dysfunction, the heartbreak, the DUI, the shoplifting incident, the arrest in Washington Square Park, the comeback, walking tiredly through a gym in slow motion while Radiohead's "Creep" blasted over the soundtrack. Noting casually that I appeared rather effete in many of the clips when he was talking to the BBC. Instead of asking if I was on drugs, the reporter wondered if I was homosexual. And he said, yep, you bet, I sure I am. Okay. He goes on to name drop on the next page. The National Enquirer. Oh, he hangs out at the Playboy Mansion, of course. Right, blackmail operation. Oh, blackmail operations play a role in this book. The National Enquirer said I was dating Juliana Margulies or Christy Turlington or Marina Rust. They said I was dating Candace Bushnell, Rupert Everett, Donna Tartt, Sherry Springfield. Supposedly I was dating George Michael. I was even dating both Diane von Furstenberg and Barry Diller. I don't know why that's so funny to me. Barry Diller. On page 24, he says, let's see. Propaganda designated to enhance the already very chic image of author as handsome young playboy. On heroin, I thought everything I did was innocent and full of love, and I had a yearning to bond with humanity. And I was relaxed and serene and focused, and I was frank and I was caring, and I signed so many autographs and made so many friends who dwindled away who didn't make it. At the time he discovered dope, he was promoting a 500-page novel called Glamorama about an international terrorist ring using the fashion world as cover. Did you guys know that, by the way? Did you know that I think there was even a lawsuit that Zoolander was – I'm not sure there was a lawsuit, but I remember reading that somewhere, probably in the National Enquirer, that there was a lawsuit because Zoolander actually copies the plot line of Ellis's book Glamorama, because it's about an international terrorist ring where the MK Ultra Candy Jones figure is a male model. Let's see. He has seizures in hotels in Raleigh. He's in comas because of his drug addiction. I woke up in Milan. I woke up in Singapore. I woke up in Moscow. I woke up in Helsinki. I woke up in Cologne. I woke up in various cities along the eastern seaboard. I woke up cradling a bottle of tequila in a white limo with bullhorns attached to its front fender as it raced across Texas. Now, I don't know if any of that is factual. It probably is, but it's, yeah, exactly right. He sure likes doing drugs and writing about doing drugs. I mean, that's essentially the crux of this novel. However, there is a point to it because it serves as a plot device, because it number one, it provides for the unreliable narrator. In fact, he even says so, that all writers are unreliable, that Patrick Bateman is unreliable, and that he is unreliable. It also shows that whenever anything happens in the story that occurs within the novel, no one believes him because of who he is, because of his character. So he's establishing a backstory here. A maxim, it's a statement of truth. Hold on. Connection unstable. Wait while we're connecting. Hopefully we're still good. Let me know if you guys can hear me. Why is my connect? Okay. All right. Should be back. Okay. Hopefully we're back. Let's see. Okay. Thank you, Ellie. Let's see. Page 28. He goes through an email list of memos from Knopf, his publisher. Bit grainy. Yep. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can really do. I thought it would be better because we're in the middle of the afternoon here. Email number number 6, 15 miles southwest of Detroit. Ryder was found hiding in the back of a stalled van on the median of a divided highway, picking at non-existent scabs. Email number 9, somehow Ryder has been tear gassed at anti-globalization demonstration in Chicago. Okay, page 31 here. This is still the first chapter. He's a total junkie now, total drug addict. Totally depraved, totally at the bottom, total nihilist. He says only the speedballs and cocaine and the blotters of acid stamped with Bart Simpson and Pikachu meant anything to me, were the only things that made me feel something. There you go. Cocaine. Let's see. Hold on. Let's go on from there. Okay, here we go. Page 33. This is about celebrity, what it means to be a celebrity. Celebrity was a life lived in code. It was a place where you constantly had to decipher what people wanted from you and where the terrain was slippery, and a world where ultimately you always made the wrong choice. What made everything less and less bearable was that I had to keep quiet about this because I knew no one else could sympathize. Maybe Jay McInerney, he says. The delight I took in feeling sorry for myself had turned into hard sadness, and the future no longer looked even remotely plausible. Just one thing seemed to be racing toward me, a blackness, a grave, the end. And so during that terrible year, there were inevitable 12-step programs, and then a flame out. And then he called Jane, the mother of his child. She listened. She made an offer. No one else wanted me. So he goes and he lives with her. And then he says, let's see, everyone basically hates him. Okay, here's a couple of pages on post-modernity on pages 36 and 37. This is really brilliant, I think. Okay, the attack on the WTC and the Pentagram building was the initial motivation. And Jane briefly considered some exotically remote place deep in the Southwest or the vastness of the heartland, but her goal eventually simplified itself into moving at least 2 hours away from the large city, since that's where suicide bombers were blowing themselves up in crowded Burger Kings and Starbucks and Walmarts and in subways at rush hour. It's 2005. Miles of major cities had been cordoned off behind barbed wire, and morning newspapers ran aerial photographs of bombed-out buildings on the front page, showing piles of tangled bodies in the shadow of a crane lifting slabs of scorched concrete. More and more often, there were, quote, no survivors. Bulletproof vests were on sale everywhere because scores of snipers had suddenly appeared. The military police station on every corner offered no solace, and surveillance cameras proved useless. There were so many faceless enemies from within the country and abroad that no one was certain who we were fighting or why. Cities had become mournful places where everyday life was suddenly interrupted by jagged mounds of steel and glass and stone. The endless CNN montages of people wandering around in a slow-motion daze, some wrapped in American flags, while the soundtrack was Bruce Springsteen softly singing "We Shall Overcome." There were too many fearful moments when the living envied the dead, and people started moving away to the country, the suburbs, anywhere. Cities were no place to raise a family, or more pointedly, according to Jane, start one. So many people had lost their capacity for love. Jane wanted to raise gifted, disciplined children, driven to succeed, but she was fearful of just about everything. The threat of creepers, SUVs, we owned one, guns, pornography, and rap music, refined sugar, ultraviolet rays, terrorists, and ourselves. Right? This is postmodernism. This is like, I haven't heard it put so succinctly, except for maybe here, Don DeLeo in the 80s in White Noise and in Webster Tarpley's Synthetic Terror book, right? That's it. I mean, this is the world we live in now, right? It's interesting that this was written, 17 years ago, but this is now, right? The summer was getting acquainted with the wide array of meds the kids were on: stimulants, mood stabilizers, the antidepressant Lexapro, the Adderall for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and various other anticonvulsants and antipsychotics that had been prescribed. It was the astronomy CD he wanted instead, his son. CD-ROM, like CD-ROMs, Xerox, internet, AOL. On page, right? Are you getting the idea of like the psychic terror tone of this book, right? Where the exterior terror sort of represents the interior malaise of the nihilism of these characters, right? Especially when they are totally depraved, degraded, and they have no grounding. They have no religion. Um, Page 39. The files that the three-letter agency kept on me beginning in November of 1990 during the uh, pre-publication controversy surrounding American Psycho and maintained ever since would have clarified things, but they had not been released, and I'm barred from quoting them. Isn't that interesting? He knows about his own file from the certain group. And the few witnesses who could corroborate these events have disappeared. For example, Robert Miller, the paranormal investigator I hired, simply vanished, and the website where I first contacted him no longer exists. We're going to get to Robert Miller later on in the book. My psychiatrist at the time, Dr. Janet Kim, offered the suggestion I was not myself during this period, right? Not himself, because he dissociates, and has hinted that perhaps drugs and alcohol were, quote, key factors in what was a, quote, delusional state. Names have been changed, and I'm semi-vague about the setting itself because it doesn't matter. It's a place like any other. Retelling this story has taught me that Lunar Park could have happened anywhere. These events were inevitable and would have occurred no matter where I was that particular moment in my life. The title Lunar Park is not intended as a take on Luna Park, as it mistakenly appeared on the initial NOV contracts. The title means something only to my son. Well, we're going to see what that means. These are the last two words of this book, and by then, I hope they will be self-explanatory to the reader as well. Regardless of how horrible the events described here might seem, there's one thing you must remember as you hold this book in your hands. All of it really happened. Every word is true. The thing that haunted me the most, since no one knew what was happening in that house, no one was scared for us, and now it's time to go back into the past. Right. So he says there, every word is true, but he also later says that, writers lie, right? That's the subtitle of the stream, right? Writers live in a maelstrom of lies. Yes. Now, lies because of the creation of the book, right? But it doesn't mean that the events aren't true, as I described in my thesis statement. Chapter 2 begins, the party, you do an awfully good impression of yourself. So chapter 2 begins exactly the same way that chapter 1 began, except chapter 1 was a sort of a meta narrative, right? Or a statement on himself. Also, I can't help but think of when he says all of it really happened, every word is true. I can't help but think of the beginning of Helter Skelter, right? This book will scare the hell out of you. Of course, we know now that a lot of the events in Helter Skelter, Vincent Bugliosi's Helter Skelter, are not true. They were made up, right? They were made up by Bugliosi, allegedly. Let's see. I'm going to skip to, he has this Halloween party, and I already described what happens at the Halloween party. But let's go to chapter 3, where he wakes up in the morning and he says on page 70, Rosa, the maid, is vacuuming the living room, and I followed large footprints that seemed to have been stamped in ash onto the beige carpeting, which this morning seemed shaggier and darker than normal. As the ghost padded through the living room, it stopped when it noticed the odd formation of the furniture. Now, he refers to himself here as a ghost because he's waking up with a hangover and he's like a ghost of himself. But he's also describing essentially the ghost. He's inhabiting the ghost of his father, or King Hamlet. Remember, Hamlet is confronted by the ghost of his father, King Hamlet, as a ghost, but it's really a demon. Remember in our interpretation of Hamlet that we did, that it's actually not the ghost of Hamlet. There are no ghosts. The ghost is a demon. He even says so in Hamlet over and over. Also, he wakes up and he's covered. He's wrapped in a bed sheet, so he's ghost-like, wandering through his own house. But seeing these stamped in the ash stamps in the carpet is both literal because of the way people have put out cigarettes on the carpet at the party the night before, but also figurative because it's like death has walked through his house because he was confronted by this demon. The house had been referred to as a McMansion in the Talk article, 9,000 square feet and situated in a fast-growing and wealthy suburb at 307 Elsinore Lane. So there's our first blatant Hamlet reference. He lives on Elsinore Lane, right? Hamlet lives at the castle at Elsinore. Let's see. He says, large, carefully designed empty spaces merged seamlessly into one another to give the illusion that the house was far grander than it actually was. So we get illusion versus reality. There's something underneath the surface. Poltergeist is a constant reference in this book. And let's see. The demon always appears to him, by the way, at 2:40 a.m., the time of his dad's death. Let's see. He says, the ghost saw no party detritus cluttering the house. It was immaculate. Confused but impressed, the ghost stared at a vase of fresh tulips sitting in the center of a kitchen table. So again, he's dissociating here. He refers to himself in the third person, the ghost, right? Like he's inhabiting, like there's something else inhabiting his body. And he also doesn't know whether the party actually happened or not. Did he actually have a Halloween party? He doesn't know because the house is so immaculate the next day. This ties into one of the gaslighting themes of the novel, where he'll continuously come home and the furniture's been rearranged, and nobody will confirm that it's been rearranged. He just thinks it's been rearranged, or it has been rearranged, and they're rearranging it, but they won't say so. Right? Death by 1,000 cuts. Death by 1,000 cuts. Page 72, hearing voices from upstairs. I breathed in deeply as I reached for our local newspaper. That's like in the short story that we just read, right? Joyce Carol Oates. when she sees the Lucifer Arnold friend demon, she breathes in. She's inspired. Let's see. Okay, he goes and sees a psychotherapist. And let's see. Page 73. Evidence suggested we were not doing well. We as in society. Researchers gloomily agreed. Here we go. Postmodernism. Environmental psychologists were interviewed. Damage had unwittingly been done. There were, quote, feared lapses. There were, quote, misconceptions about potential. Situations had, quote, deteriorated. Cruelty was on the rise, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. No one knew what normal behavior was anymore, and some argued that this was a form of virtue, and no one argued back. No one challenged anything. Anxiety was soaking up most people's days. Everyone had become preoccupied with horror. We were doomed. We deserved it. I was so tired. The kids were mimicking our facial expressions. Right? The kids are mimicking the facial expressions just like he's mimicking the expression of his father unwittingly. Okay, page 74 talks about the CHILD murders that have been occurring on the outskirts of town, which is sort of a parallel narrative in this. And you can't help but imagine that he is the serial killer. But all of these BOYS have been disappearing and vanishing without a trace. And CNN, parents of the missing boys were urged to appear on CNN and humanize their CHILD in case the abductors were watching. Except for increased ratings, these news conferences accomplished nothing beyond serving as a reminder of the incidental malice of the universe. Listen to this nihilistic world that they live in, right? Let's see. Okay, page 75. This wide-awake nightmare lasted no more than 30 seconds, a rapid montage that nonetheless required a Klonopin, a rampage at the SCHOOL. I'm so scared, being whispered over the cell phone, what sounds like firecrackers popping off in the background, the ricocheting bullet that hurls the cyber person to the floor, the random firing in the library, the blood sprayed over an unfinished EXAM, the final moments when the gunman places the magnum in his, the boy who had nothing to lose, the Eleville that didn't take hold on the bipolar disorder not detected, the book on witchcraft found beneath the bed, the X carved into his chest in the attempted suicide the month before, the broken hand from punching a wall, the nights lying in bed counting to 1,000, the pet rabbit found later that afternoon hanging from a hook in a small closet, and finally the closing images of the endless coverage. That's the world, right? That is the psychic vampire world that he's describing in this book, and in which we live now. I mean, look at the events that have just happened, right? The unknown terror, right? Okay, so then he questions his wife. He says, I decided to change the topic, hoping for a softer reaction. So who was the guy who came as Patrick Bateman last night? I asked. The guy in the Armani suit with all the fake blood on it. I have no idea. A student of yours? And then they bring up the Turby. Now, can you figure out what the Turby is? Terby. Can you figure out what that is? It's an anagram. Remember the author and the protagonist is Bret Easton Ellis. Bret. Turby is the demonic doll that's haunting him. I flipped through the papers. Robbie complained about noises last night after the party was over, but he was unsure where they were coming from, the attic or maybe on the roof, but also definitely on the sides of the house. There were scratching sounds at his door, he said, when he woke up this morning. His furniture had been rearranged, and he found 3 or 4 deep grooves on the bottom of his door, which he insisted he didn't make. And when he touched the doorknob, it was wet. Someone slimed it, he said, shuddering. His daughter, he asked his daughter, how's everything with Turby, honey? Had I really been so afraid of it last night? Because remember, he was at the party. He ended up alone, and he saw a shadow like in his upstairs in his bedroom window, kind of like in Gatsby, right? Sees the shadow of the guy up in the ivory tower, watching over all. And then he's attacked by the animated demon of this Turby doll. Then he says on page 82, I suddenly noticed a paperback of Lord of the Flies. And then he says, I don't even understand this book now. Geez, why don't they just assign her Moby Dick? This is absurd. Well, you don't want to assign that either. Damn. Oh, and by the way, his daughter's in like 1st grade because she's gifted and goes to the school. Let's see. Let's skip to he's writing this degenerate, depraved prawn novel that he takes delight in, drugging their gimlets with OxyContin and all this stuff. Let's see. Here he goes, page 101. He finally meets up with the specter of himself, aka Bateman. When I looked up, a student had appeared in the doorway and was staring at me sheepishly. There was nothing unusual about him at first glance. Tall, handsome in a generic way, a lean face, slightly chiseled, thick reddish brown hair, very tightly cropped, a backpack slung over his shoulders. He was wearing jeans and an antique olive green Armani sweater with the designer's emblem on it. He was holding a Starbucks cup and seemed more alert than the squinty-eyed slackers that populated the campus. And I thought I couldn't place him. I knew I'd seen him before, and so I was intrigued. Plus, he was holding a copy of my first novel, Less Than Zero, which made him stand up and say hello. Now, it turns out that this guy isn't there, right? He's actually just talking to his altar. On page 104, at that point, I realized where I'd seen Clayton before. He was at the Halloween party last night. He was dressed as Bateman. I breathed in, something caught in me, and I shivered. Again, he breathes in, he inspires, right? He goes full on D.I.D. on the next couple of pages because he realizes he wasn't talking to anyone. I sighed and stood up straight. Are we ever going to do? Oh God, he calls out. Listen, man. Yes, you need God. Let's see. The tangerines in Proust. You mean Madeline's? Yeah, like those little tangerines. How did they get? Okay, so that plays a part later on when the Turby is eating he has a dream of the Turby eating oranges. It's also the orange beak of the Turby itself. Whenever I see orange in books like this, I always think like fire, like he's eating fire because he's a hellbird. A page, this is chapter 6, The Shrinks. He has this doctor named Dr. Fajeda. He calls her Dr. Fajita. Page 111, he says, but how did that begin to constitute a celibate relationship? Ah, yes, how indeed. The dark voice in the back of my mind whispered frequently. The antidepressants I was on. I even hinted about the sexual scars from my CHILDHOOD. He picks up things like about how to be a human from watching Oprah. And they say he's the master of negative communication. Later on, she waited patiently. Mr. Ellis, the main reason you're here is to find ways to get to know your son. That is essential. That's necessary that you connect with your son. There was nothing to say except I'm getting a grip on the situation. I don't think you are. Why not? Because you haven't even mentioned him once in the time you've been here. Okay, so here we go into, he goes back home on page 116, 117. The carpet looks darker, shaggier, the pale beige now morphing into something that bordered on teal or green because he is in a hellscape and his house is being haunted like Poltergeist, House of Usher. Now here we go with Lunar Park, okay, title Lunar Park. Robbie's room had a space age theme. Planet and comet and moon decals were pasted all over the walls, suggesting that you are now floating with a night black sky somewhere deep in space. Spheres made of glass beads dangled from a glittering, savage-looking asteroid that hung from the ceiling above a king-sized Art Deco bed fitted with a stylish comforter. There were various moons, Jupiter's Io and Saturn's Titan. I think, you guys, that what this symbolizes is, I think that he has a son in reality, this character. But what I think is happening here is that just as the ghost of Hamlet confronts his son, I think that he's being confronted by the demon of his father, and that he puts himself in the place of his son and his dad in the place of him. So he's inhabiting sort of three different altars. And when he talks about Lunar Park, I think that this is dark. I think that because of the imagery later on the book, I think that he's been assaulted by his dad in the place where he looks up and he sees these moons, and that takes him away to this Lunar Park, right? That's where he escapes. He sort of rises above his body and he transcends in his brain as a defense mechanism, right? Which is part of D.I.D. And I think that he is trying to come to grips with what his dad has done to him in this book. I mean, in his life, by placing himself in the shoes of his son, hating himself. Does that make sense? His son wants to be an astronaut, right? He wants to get away. He wants to rise above. He wants to transcend and escape Earth. This sure does make Earth look shitty, right? In this book, at least in their world. All I ever wanted was a TV and a lock on my door, he tells his son. It all seemed horribly useless to me because the sky was always black in space and there was no sound on the moon. And it was another world where you would always be lost. Okay, the idea of another world where you would always be lost is intentional because he's tying in, because later on he finds that the password, he discovers that his son has been playing this game with his friends where they're talking to each other in the voices of the missing KIDS. Okay. And he discovers that the password is Never Neverland. So they're like the lost, they've been lost. They're like the Lost Boys. And that he himself is a lost boy. He doesn't know it. And he's a grown man, but he doesn't know that he's a lost boy and that he's trying to find himself. Right. He says, I knew that Robbie would argue that far beneath its freezing craters and treacherous sand-blown surfaces lay a warm and yielding heart, right? Just like the heart of himself that he's trying to discover and the heart of his father that was never there. I flinched when I heard it lock. He leaves the room and he hears the door lock. A sconce flickered as I walked past, which is pure, Stranger Things in this like inverted hell world that they're in. Page 122, he mentions witches. He says, There were no ballerinas or witches or hobos or ghosts at the Halloween party. There's no hobo demons, right? Hobo demons, excuse me. There's no hobo demons. Got a light. Twin Peaks. I had the feeling that I was being followed. Okay, page 123, electrical interference, the cold, the close moon, and haze. He says, I couldn't understand why there's a Mercedes outside, which is actually his dad's, is exactly like his dad's car that he handed down to him. Why the car no longer seemed innocent, and why it was beginning after just 2 sightings to mean something dark, a reminder of something black. I was in a haze. I felt haunted. And then there was a hot wind and the barely audible hum of what sounded like electrical equipment. I was shivering. I felt sorrow. The moon was giant that night, hanging low in the black sky, orange tinted. And people kept commenting on how close to the earth it seemed. Something passed over me and then flew away. He's outside. Okay, here we go. I noticed that Victor, that's the dog, Bret Easton Ellis always reuses the same character names or even just characters in his books. Remember, Victor was in Rules of Attraction, right? He's the college student that goes away for like a semester and like raves in Europe and stuff. I noticed that Victor was standing up again and staring out in the woods. The hot wind ruffling his golden coat. I just kept staring into the blackness of the woods, drawn toward the darkness as I always had been. The darkness was eclipsing everything. And then, let's see. Then I thought I saw Victor, a shape, low and hunched over, had emerged from the woods, but I couldn't make out what it was. It was the size of Victor, perhaps larger, but its movements were spider-like as it lurched grotesquely sideways. Can you feel me? It asked. Go away, I whispered. I was too fucked up to deal with it. Go away. It was time you learned something. I could hear it moaning. I was not alone. It wanted to deceive. Something huge and black was passing over the house. It was flying, and then it spun around in midair, and it was suddenly beneath me, and the wind kept howling, and there was briefly a snarl of animals fighting in the woods, and then the thing began circling above me as I knelt in front of the headstone next to the hole in the ground. He looks at the headstone, and the headstone says, Robert Martin Ellis. That's his dad. Back in the guest room, drinking from the magnum of vodka, I kept thinking one thing, just 2 words. He's back. It's a damn demon. Right? He's dissociated. He's found himself in the upside down, and there's a damn demon outside. And then, as proof of D.I.D, you guys, I woke the next day, chapter 9, I woke up in the guest room to the sound of a leaf blower, and when I peered out the window, I felt momentarily okay about things until I realized I was fully clothed, not a good sign, and had no recollection of how I fell asleep last night. Right? Because he became someone else. His alter came out, and he dissociated. Right? Waking up clothed, not knowing where you are in a strange place after a night of confronting demons is certainly a sign of D.I.D. Here we go. On page 131, I noticed the pool man fishing what looked like a dead crow out of the jacuzzi. I would find out that another crow had been nailed to the trunk of a large pine tree in front of the Larson's house, and another crow had been broken in half and stuffed into the Moore's mailbox. There was also one found mangled, chewed on, is the phrase Mark Huntington will use, in the back of Nicholas Moore's Grand Cherokee. And yet another crow was dangling from a massive spider web. Remember the spider-like movements on page one? What was it? Page 130, page 126. That spanned the 2 oaks in the O'Connor's front yard. The smell of smoke was in the air. The sun was still climbing in the sky. Sarah had left her turby lying by the pool, and in the morning light, it resembled something black and dead. He asked the gardener to go outside with him, and they find a black trail with slime and dead animals. Let's see. Chapter 10, here's another Hamlet nod. They go to the Fortinbras Mall, right? Remember, Fortinbras is the Norwegian king who is the Deus Ex Machina, quasi Deus Ex Machina in Hamlet, who's invading Denmark. The mall is where, oh, here we go. Yeah, the mall. I was about to say the mall is where the kids disappear. And it says on page 141, this girl was wearing with a Peter Pan collar. Okay, page 143. This is pretty terrifying. He's talking to his daughter, and his daughter all of a sudden says, "Grandpa, talk to me." But honey, that grandpa's dead. But grandpa isn't dead, Daddy, she said. So she's hearing messages and voices from this doll. Kristen at Slow Boy Whiteboard probably has a video somewhere about. Remember, there was that thing about CIA using doing psyop experiments with dolls, right? Talking dolls. You guys remember that from way back? It's like way back in the Mind Palace, right? About there was something about CIA using doing psyop experiments, maybe part of MK Ultra or MK Naomi using hacking talking dolls. Let's see. On page 153, Detective Donald Kimball walks in. Remember Donald Kimball in American Psycho, played by Willem Dafoe, right? Gotta go. T-Boone Pickens just walked in. I can't. Got a 10:30 matinee of Les Mis. Yeah, I got to meet Cliff Huxtable at the Four Seasons, he says. Donald Kimball shows up and asks about the missing KIDS. And then says that there have been a bunch of people murdered. Basically, he warns Bret Easton Ellis, the protagonist here and the author, that somebody has been copycat murdering people based on his book. And it turns out in the end of the book, spoiler alert, it turns out at the end of the book that Donald Kimball is actually the murderer, or at least one of the murderers. Now, who's to say that that also isn't him and that he never met a Donald Kimball at all? That he's just another, manifestation or alter. Let's see. Oh, this is great. Page 160. You guys are going to like this. Page 160 here. Gloria Steinem. Let's see. He's talking about how during the tour of American Psycho, the book tour, when it was first published, he was actually given a huge advance for the publication of American Psycho. It was like, 100K plus, right? And then they refused to publish it. And then he had to go find an alternate publisher. I guess it was Vintage. And then Gloria Steinem, remember CIA Gloria Steinem, is the one who led the charge and had the book boycotted and banned. And it says, and her reason was there's going to be murders. There's going to be like murders of women, and they're going to blame, and it's going to be based on Patrick Bateman and on the book. And he says, Gloria Steinem had reiterated this over and over to Larry King in the winter of 1991, and that's why the National Organization for Women had boycotted the book. In a small world filled with black ironies, Miss Steinem eventually married David Bale, the father of the actor who played Patrick Bateman in the movie. I thought the idea was laughable, that there was no one as insane and vicious as this fictional character out there in the real world. Besides, Patrick Bateman was a notoriously unreliable narrator like himself. And if you actually read the book, you could come away doubting that these crimes had even occurred. The fantasies were an escape. This was the book's thesis. It was about society and manners and mores, and not about cutting up women. How could anyone who read this book not see this? But he found himself in Patrick Bateman's shoes. I felt like an unreliable narrator, even though I knew I wasn't. Yet then I thought, well, had he? Did you guys know that? Isn't that crazy? That CIA Gloria Steinem, who led the charge against American Psycho, married the father of the guy who played Patrick Bateman in the movie American Psycho. Did you know that? Did you know David Bale, Christian Bale's dad, Bateman, Christian Bale, Patrick Bateman's dad, was like an environmentalist and was an environmentalist and like, what was he? an entrepreneurial hedge funder or something like that, right? And she married. Oh, by the way, also they got married at the home of a Cherokee bruja with the last name Man Killer. That actually happened. That's crazy, right? I mean, it's too strange to be ironic. It's just true, right? That's just crazy to me, y'all. I was blown away. I totally forgotten that when I reread the book. Let's see. A crow landed on the lawn and picked disinterestedly at an autumn leaf. It was followed by another large crow. He asked the detective, "Am I a suspect?" He says, "No, you're not." And then he says, "How do you know I'm not?" Let me get this straight. I swallowed again. You're telling me that Patrick Bateman is alive and well and killing people in Midland County? It's no longer a theory, Mr. Ellis. And also, the crime scenes are immaculate. Like a ghost. That was the first thing I thought. Like a ghost. Or like an altar. Right? Or like a demon in we know D.I.D. and possession go hand in hand, right? Especially even the idea of talking backwards and backmasking. Have you figured out the anagram? Have you figured out the turby yet? What is the turby? Speaking of backwards, he says, but the author of the book isn't in the book. You're not a fictional character, are you, Mr. Ellis? Questioning his own reality. Sarah brought the turby over to me. The horrible turby, over and over, and asked me why its claws were encrusted with what looked like dried crimson paint, and if I could help her wash those claws in the kitchen sink. He takes an Ambien. Ambien is also, the stories of people taking Ambien and dissociating, right? Becoming amnesiac. He's back, but I'd been wrong because now they were both back, he says. Okay, moving on. Let's see. I'm skipping ahead here to the gang stalking and gaslighting on page 188. You're wasted, Bret. You're wasted. Now give me the gun. Okay, so what happens is he's at home and his son wakes up from a nightmare and comes in and says, "Daddy, I think that there's somebody in the house." You want me to tell you what the turby is? Terby. The turby is him, right? Why, Bret? Why, Bret? Right? The turby is him. It's he himself. So his son wakes up from a nightmare and says there's somebody in the house. He grabs his son and he goes into the hallway and he is confronted by the demon Turby, who's now bigger and larger and is coming at them. They go into then like the dog, basically it looks like the dog, but the dog becomes like this demon beast creature, right? Symbolizing his own beastliness, right? And then he goes into the bedroom and then he goes in through another room. He gets his gun out of his safe and he's walking around the house and he says, "Call police," and all that stuff. And then finally police come, he gets the kids out of the house. Of course, when they get there, they go, "Oh, you're drunk, sir." And he's got like half a bottle of vodka beside him. He took a Klonopin or a Xanax. Nobody trusts him. And his son even says, like, "I don't know. I didn't see it." So we know that this was dissociation. When he goes back in, his wife was standing behind me. Let's see, when I pointed in the living room and the rearranged furniture, and then I pointed at the footprints in some kind of sticky triumph. I waited for her to react. "I arranged that furniture this morning, Jane. This was not how it was when we left tonight." "It wasn't?" "No, Jane. And I don't take that fucking condescending tone with me," I said, scowling. "Someone rearranged it while we were gone. Someone was in this house and rearranged that furniture and left those." Now he's actually gaslighting himself, right? Because he rearranged the furniture himself and then rearranged it back. Now he rearranged the furniture because it's going to mimic his own childhood home. And he rearranges his son's room to look exactly like his own childhood home because he's trying to confront the abuse that happened to him there, as an outside character. The Turby was in there, the dead mouse, the open windows, all like dead animals everywhere. Page 191. And suddenly on that night, I knew that I needed to be in that house. I needed to be a participant. I needed to be grounded in the life of the family that lived there. More than anyone else in the world, I needed to be there because on that night, I came to believe that I was the only one who could save my family. He's also the only one that's hurting his family. I would buy my exit ticket. His exit, right? This is not an exit, American Psycho. Let's see. The license plates on the cream-colored 450 SL that had sat in front of our house only minutes earlier were the exact ones in the cream-colored 450 SL my deceased father had driven more than 20 years ago. The cream-colored 450 SL reminds me of the gold chariot Lucifer car of Arnold Friend in the short story that we just read. All right, here we go. Page 192. This is next chapter. He says, I convinced myself I hadn't seen anything. I had done this many times before when my father struck me when I first broke up. Many times before, my father struck me, when I first broke up with Jane, when I overdosed in Seattle. Every moment I thought about reaching for my son, and I was adept at erasing reality. Okay, this is a great passage here. As a writer, you slant all evidence in favor of the conclusions you want to produce, and you rarely tilt in favor of the truth. But since on the morning of November 3rd, the truth was irrelevant, since the truth had already been disqualified, I was free to envision another movie, right? He's a character in his own movie here. And since I was good at making up things and detailing them meticulously, giving them the necessary spin and shine, I began realizing a new film with different scenes and a happier. And when he says I began realizing, it means I understood it, but to realize means to make something, to get something done, right? It's completed. And a happier ending that didn't leave me shivering in the guest room alone and afraid. But this is what a writer does. His life is a maelstrom of lies. Embellishment is his focal point. This is what we do to please others. This is what we do in order to flee ourselves. A writer's physical life is basically one of stasis. And to combat this constraint, an opposite world and another self have to be constructed daily. The problem I encountered that morning was that I needed to compose the peaceful alternative to the terror of last night. Yet the half world of the writer's life encourages drama and pain, and defeat is good for art. If it was day, we made it night. If it was love, we made it hate. If serenity became chaos, kindness became viciousness, God became the devil, a daughter became a whore. I had been inordinately rewarded for participating in this process, and lying often leaked from my writing life, an enclosed sphere of consciousness, a place suspended outside of time where the untruths flowed onto the whiteness of a blank screen, into the part of me that was tactile and alive. But admittedly, on that third day of November, I was at a point at which I believed the two had merged and I could not tell one from the other. So we have the unification of opposites, a sort of a Gnostic inversion of his own life. He's embracing his alters in the movie of his own life, right? I needed to do this because another day was waiting for me. If I was going to get through it with any semblance of sanity, I would have to deny last night. Also on page 194, there's the hedges and the hotel guard. So if you haven't noticed the Shining analogy throughout, if you haven't noticed the Shining references, right? I mean, he's basically Jack Torrance, but he's also Danny. Danny! Remember? He's God, right? He is both Jack Torrance as the D.I.D. writer who is involved in the bacchanal of depravity prior, he's the Eyes Wide Shut is his actual life. I mean, he makes reference to that in the book, that in parts that I haven't read, but he's involved in Eyes Wide Shut activities. Then he goes into seclusion in this sort of suburban home, which is like the Overlook Hotel, right? It's like the house itself is haunted. Danny! And he's trying to make his way through the labyrinthine maze of his mind, searching for his true self. But he's both Danny and Jack. Even though he's got a son, Robbie, he is Robbie in this, right? Let's see. Page 195. For a brief moment, I thought I saw myself lying on that chaise longue, looking back at myself. Yeah, I'm sorry. Anybody with headphones, I feel for you. Sorry about that. It was only a flash, but suddenly I was that silhouette from last night, the shadow that I had dreamt. I moved around the room, replicating the shadow's movements, wondering what it had been looking for. Right? Again, he is the shadow. He's his own shade. The moon continued pulsing on the screensaver. And then he goes to Ophelia Boulevard. So we have Elsinore Lane, Fortinbras Mall, Ophelia Boulevard. I think later there's a Claudius Street, right? Let's see. We were shown, they go to the school and they have a meeting and they are shown samples of Robbie's artwork, all moonscapes. And we were told what was positive and what needed improvement. I zoned out. He sees his daughter's drawings and he sees she's drawn like these drawings of the Turby. There were dozens of them swooping down on the house that resembled ours, angry in full attack mode. Well, that ain't good. Page 201, I briefly glimpsed the orange flashes of koi, which is a reference to the Turby. He saw a vision of the Turby eating an orange flower. And he speaks to this woman at night there, this other mother, and the mother is freaking out because of all the missing KIDS and says they're going to Neverland. Let's see. Neverland, like in Peter Pan, that's where the boys are. Mimicking the bird had taken a lot of effort, and she leaned back against the wall without focusing on me. The point is that no one is taking them anywhere. They're taking them to the negative zone, right? The finders have found these poor BOIS and taken them to the negative zone. And she's trying to say that, no, they ran away. They just disappeared. Oblivion, sort of like in American Psycho. Remember when Kimball says, isn't it weird that somebody can be walking around one day and then then they just sort of disappear? And Bateman says the earth just kind of opens up and swallows them. You remember that scene? That is what happens. That's what's happened to his own soul here, right? I didn't say anything. I swallowed hard and went cold. She was staring at me, her eyes bleeding with fear. She says her son Ashton collects information about the BOIS. Nadine was still gripping my forearm and she was staring at me and she kept nodding. Yes, there's a file on his computer and he didn't know I found it. He collects information about the BOIS. She breathed in and swallowed rapidly, and he trades it with his friends. What the fuck? I wrote. Right? What the fuck? Yeah, because this is like whatever happened to Johnny Gosh, right? And he says, why should I care about this? And she says, because Robbie's one of the BOIS that he's trading information with. So then, and she begins sobbing. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Here's the Dark Passenger, page 208, end of chapter 13. Let's see. Obscuring the palm trees now lining the highway everywhere and above them, the geometry of a constellation from a distant time zone. And I also realized there was no need to point this out to Jane because in the end, I was only the passenger. I wrote Robbie's space travel. What did I write? Robbie's space travel something and Lunar Park motif, right? Because he's going to the other place. And he himself, Robbie is Bret. And Bret is the dark passenger on the way to this other place, right? He's taken on this altar, this dark passenger. Yeah. His furniture gets rearranged again. Page 210. I don't know what to say. I was now my father. Robbie was now me. I saw mirrored in his. My world was mirrored there. His eyes were bright and alert. He was putting on a performance. Do you get it? Do you see how he is the other character? Then the boy asks, like, hey, what if there's what about this war that's going on? I'm worried about if there's a draft. And he says at one point on page 211, the war won't last that long. Oh, spoiler alert, it did. Son asks, are there monsters in our house, Daddy? I think there are monsters in the house. Is Turby alive? His daughter asks. At one point when he went into the room, the Turby like bit his hand, the hand that bites, right? And the hand that feeds. And that is surely a recall that happened to him in his youth. He says, she says, the Turby says, he says he knows who you are. Turby says, not in a human way, but in a Turby way. Turby knows things. What things? I kept swallowing. Everything he wants to know. Oh my gosh. Imagine this. Oh boy. Okay. On page 217, he specifically mentions, then there were problems, not even the men could alter. They say that the son is acting like an amnesiac. He's kind of floating through life, which is himself. Okay, here we go. On page 2, Bret Easton Ellis really knows how to end a chapter, by the way. This guy can write. He can write a chapter. As a writer, like the hardest things are like the first line, the first paragraph, right? The ending, but also the start and the endings of chapters. And Bret Easton Ellis, if anything, I mean, he even has the commentary that we went through about how to begin a book, right? And he begins the book as an exposition, and then he re-begins the book. There's a figurative and then a literal. And then this guy can write the hell out of end of a chapter. End of chapter 14. Through that long night, I just sat in my office numb, waiting for something while my family slept upstairs. Everything around me was faintly vibrating, and I kept picturing a gray river made of ash flowing backwards. At first, I was filled with a sort of wonderment, but when I realized it wasn't tied to anything in particular, the wonderment crumbled into fear. And this was followed by grief and the piercing echoes from a past I didn't want to remember. So I concentrated instead on the predictions rippling through me that because of their dark nature, I then had to ignore. This is the process, the actual transformation into an altar. I've never read anything like this, you guys. This is incredible. The denial of everything would pull me gently away from reality, but only for a moment, because lines started connecting with other lines, and gradually an entire grid was forming, and it became coherent with a specific meaning. And finally, emerging from the void was an image of my father. His face was white, and his eyes were closed in repose, and his mouth was just a line that soon opened up, screaming. My mind kept whispering to itself. And in my memories, it all was there. The pink stucco house, the green shag carpeting, the bathing suits from the Mauna Kea, our neighbors Susan and Bill Allen. And I could see my father's cream-colored 450 SL as it crossed the lanes of an interstate lined with citrus trees. There's the citrus. And the Turby eating the orange beak of the Turby. Racing towards an off-ramp not far from here called Sherman Oaks. And sometimes on the night and early morning of November 4th, I laughed with disbelief at the noises roaring in my head, and I kept talking to myself. But I was a man trying to have a rational conversation with someone who was losing it, and I cried, "Let it go, let it go." But I could no longer avoid recognizing the fact that I had to accept what was happening, that my father wanted to give me something. And as I kept repeating his name, I realized what it was, a warning. And then when he wakes up, the sky became a huge white screen. So he has a hypnagogic hallucination. And on page 226, 227, we get the poltergeist. Oh, yeah. And thank you to everybody who's here. Please make sure you smash that like. You leave a comment for me down below after we're done. And don't forget, you can support me through PayPal, Cash App, or Venmo. I sure do appreciate your support, everybody out there. We're going to keep going anyway because I love doing this and I love being here with you guys, and this is fun. But it sure does help me if you support me and support the channel. So thank you so much to everybody who supported me, and please don't hesitate to just drop a couple of those Putin coin or whatever my way. Appreciate it. Appreciate y'all. Let's see, page 226. Again, we're doing Lunar Park by Bret Easton Ellis. He says, the past starts visiting and confronting you. My father was following me, but he had been following you forever. It was in the peeling of the house and the lights that flickered and dimmed, and it was in the rearrangement of the furniture and the wet bathing trunks and the sightings of cream-colored Mercedes. They were floating against the dark purple streaks of the late afternoon sky. The words, "I'm not afraid," said as a rebuke to someone. He had been erased from everything, but now he was back, and I understood that there was another world underneath the one where we lived. Right? This is the inverted upside down world. This is the world that he has tried to push away, numbing it through, his drugs and degradation and depravity. It's the world that he's pushing away by trying to live a normal life through writing. The house itself is becoming alive, like in Poltergeist. The outer degradation of the house symbolizes the inner degradation of his own life. And it's also a Gnostic Neoplatonic world where he thinks that he can search for the source of his true self and, transcend through confronting his trauma, which he is unknowingly doing. It's also the world of the past, right? Everyone knew bachelors lost their minds and became hungry specters. He says, free Bret, start over, get younger, absorb yourself back into the world of teenage flame out and the curving murals of scorched corpses. That's like the actual altars that what's his name? Jeffrey Dahmer had, right? Combined with the disgusting satanic artwork of the what are those guys' names? What are the guys' names? The two guys, the with the hand. They managed Hillary's campaign. What's her name? The two brothers, and they were always at Jeff Stein Effrey Island. They managed their campaign. The two bald guys, and they hung out with Marinka. What the hell are their names? Natesky will know. But thank you. Yes, those guys. Yes. Thank you, Natesky. The pre-Dester brothers. Right. An invisible force pushed me towards a destination. I could actually feel this happening to me physically. A small implosion occurred. Page 229. I was staring at the crow circling above me, and in that instant, I realized something. Oh, yeah. Claudius Street from Hamlet, page 231. Yes, Kristen, exactly. Okay, now he's on the computer at night, sort of, going into his altar or whatever. And he gets these emails, these anonymous emails from the Bank of America where his dad's ashes are. Now, one level of this could be, oh, you got to go back and lay your dad to rest, right? That's not really what's happening. This is just him confronting the demon of his dad and his ABUSE. And then he gets this email, which is a 2005 grainy AOL video file of looking in Lost Highway style of his dad in his Newport Beach condo the night that he died at 2:40 a.m. But he realizes that it's actually this Clayton Patrick Bateman guy that he's seeing it through the eyes of, and that it's actually him. Page 235. My father stared at his frail visage in a giant mirror, the mirror being the symbol of the psyche, right? The soul. Also, the frail visage is a nod to when Hamlet sees King Hamlet, right? And his father has a grizzled visage. Let's see. Page 236. I stifled a scream when I saw there was no reflection of the camera or who was behind it at any of the mirrors that walled the bathroom. He's lost himself in this vision. The camera was an invitation to die. My father was looking directly at me. He said one word, Robbie. I was seeing something through the eyes of a person. His eyes were black, and the face belonged to Clayton. His eyes go black like the black eyes of these demon D.I.D people, right? And then at the end, he says, I decided to leave the house and drive to the college and find a BOY. A, not the. He's not talking about to find the BOY, right? Referring to Clayton, he's finding A. Now that is what indicates to me that this he's also Walters is the serial killer, right? Because he's making these boys go to these people, these KIDS go to Neverland. Why would he say A and not the? That disturbed me. Page 243 gets to campus and he's looking for Clayton. Freezing air scorched the campus, piercing it. The air rushing forward felt like a knife, Bateman's knife. The hands on the clock tower swinging like a pendulum. We get a Poe nod there, right, with the pit and the pendulum. You could actually hear the wind snarling. I needed someone to verify it for me so we could share a laugh, but he did. So he can't even trust his own self. He can't trust it. He can't trust himself or whether what he's seeing is real because he goes there and there's nobody by that such name at the campus. Then he finds out that the girl that was doing the study on him, right, doing the thesis on him, is dead. They found her in a motel room at the Orsic Motel. This is Osric from Hamlet. There were ropes and body parts positioned in front of mirrors. Again, the head and the hands. The hand because the hand bit him, and the head, the head because later he's going to see his own. He's going to see his own face in the head of the turby. And the walls were splashed with blood. There was evidence that a blowtorch had been used at one point, and the bones in both arms had been broken before the skin had, okay. Okay, I'm not going to read that part. And a huge drawing in the victim's blood of a face adorned the wall above the gutted bed with the words, I'm back, also dripping in blood. And they illuminate the room, right? He's walking into this satanic ritual ceremony, this blood sacrifice. Clayton was making the book come true. He'd been in my house. Oh, and the name of the girl that was doing the thesis on him and the one that was just found murdered her name was Amy Light. Light. We just talked in the last one about Lux and in the version the VIRGINSUICIDES, the Sofia Coppola movie, and how that mirrors the Joyce Carol Oates short story that we just read. It's a shame we have to do code, but we have to. When I thought of order and facts, I simply began laughing. Page 250 in italics. But you hadn't written that book, American Psycho. Something else had wrote that book. And your father now wanted you to notice things, but something else did not. You dream a book, and sometimes the dreams come true. When you give up life for fiction, you become a character. A writer would always be cut off from actual experience because he was the writer. Page 251, the moon will be a mirror reflecting everything it looms over, and the smell of burning leaves will permeate the night air as you briefly reflect on a day that has passed too quickly. Remember I said about the image of what Lunar Park is? The site of the trauma, right? And the moon is reflecting back the trauma that it views, just as the moon reflects the light itself. The end of this chapter, end of chapter 16. The computer on her desk will be the only light in the room, illuminating a stack of papers. And as you scan the empty room, suddenly something will jump up on the windowsill and scowl at you, and you will scream and leap back until you realize it's only your cat, pawing hungrily at the pane of glass separating you from it. And you will rush back to your car when you notice the dried blood staining its jaws. That isn't the real person. You are afraid again because it isn't time to wake up from the nightmare yet. And he asked Kimball, did you find a navel ring in the torso in the shower stall in the Orsic Motel? Right? Because this character has killed her. Later on, pages 271, 272, oh no, page 270, we start to get the dissociation into the third person. He's now referring to himself in twos. There's himself and the writer. But when the writer forced me to look more closely, I realized something had pecked him out. I imagined that something was witnessing my discovery of the cat because he finds a dead cat in the yard, and I whirled around as a sudden flash of black around the corner of the house. The writer promised me this was not something I had dreamt, but I could not imagine how the Turby had captured the cat. I could not imagine the doll doing this. The writer could imagine that scene. Was the last thing the cat saw the contorted face of the bird, and above it an empty gray sky, just like the moon, right? The writer pondered the various scenes until I stepped in and forced the writer to hope this was not true, because if I believed that the doll was responsible, the ground I stood on would shift into a world made of the mangled thing at my feet belonged to Amy Light. The writer told me it was hiding. I asked the writer, how does something that's not alive hide itself? I asked the writer, how do you entice something that's not alive out of its hiding place? This silenced the writer momentarily. The writer was reactivated when I moved to Sarah's window and gazed down at the hedge and the mutilated cat. The writer suggested we go to Robbie's room. This is dark, isn't it? Okay, and then on page 275, the Turby attacks. The Turby was standing in the doorway, its wings outstretched. It wasn't a doll anymore. It was now something else. It stood perfectly still, but something was stirring beneath its feathers. The presence of the Turby and all the things it had done loosened me from my fear, and I rushed toward it. The animatronic lips below its beak parted to reveal a wide, uneven set of fangs that I didn't know it had. The black face seized up, its eyes brightly wet, and its feathers started bristling as I threw the sweater over it. The doll knew you were in Robbie's room and didn't want you to find the files, just as it had not wanted you to see what was in Robbie's room on Sunday night, the night it bit you. The thing was protecting something. It didn't want you to know things. Outside, the sky was divided in half. Part of it was an intense Arctic blue, slowly being erased by a sheet of black clouds. And then we get annihilation, obliteration, and Gotterdammerung here. I was following an outline. I was calculating the weather. I was predicting the events. I wanted answers. I needed clarity. I had to control the world. Now we're just full on Crowley chaos magic, right? The writer yearned for chaos, mystery, death. These were his inspirations. This was the impulse he leaned toward. The writer wanted bombs exploding. The writer wanted the Olympian defeat. The writer craved myth and legend and coincidence and flames. The writer wanted Patrick Bateman back in our lives. The writer was hoping the horror of it all would galvanize me. I innocently believed in metaphor, which at this point the writer actively discouraged. Because it's real, right? And also, the galvanization reminds me of the impetus for D.I.D. in Frankenstein. And I think one thing that's not mentioned here literally on the page, but is probably true, is that at some point in all of his hospitalizations and comas and the image of whenever he walks down the hall and the flickering of the wall sconces and the sort of electrical images make me think that he either had electroshock therapy or, it was just him being clear, zapped back to life with the defibrillator, right? Because the electrical sparks seem to indicate that in his sort of fractured memory. Later on, we're skipping ahead now, going towards the end of the book here. Let's see. He's at home and Dad, there's something on you. And the image of the Turby, he wakes up with the Turby on top of him now, this sort of beast. And it's clearly a succubus, right? And you remember that painting of the incubus, and it reminds me a lot of that, but this is like a psychic vampire feeding on his soul in his dream state. And he wakes up, he shouted and knocked the thing off my chest as I bolted up. The Turby fell to the floor, bolted like a lightning bolt, electricity. The Turby fell to the floor and quickly clawed itself under the bed. Notice that all of these things happen like in bedrooms. This demon appears like in bedrooms in the house. Page 307, it was 3 feet high and covered in hair, streaked black and blonde, and it moved on feet that weren't visible. When the beam of light caught it, there was another hissing sound. It shambled quickly to the other side of the hallway. but with each movement, it was advancing towards us. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. It was covered with hair entangled with twigs and dead leaves and feathers. It had no features. Um, there was a cloud of gnats and buzzing above the thing, following it to where it had pushed itself up against the wall. The beam was locked on it. Within the hair, a bright red hole ringed with teeth appeared. Okay, this is obvious psychosexual imagery. And also Lord of the Flies, right? This is Beelzebub appearing. And then it says, the worst thing I noticed was a large eye haphazardly placed on top and rolling around in its flat disc-shaped socket involuntarily. Well, the one eye appears where the pineal gland is, right? Which is sort of an Arduino Quome image, sucking his soul out. He can't find a flashlight, so his son finds a green lightsaber, which is cool. It was gnawing at the door. It was using its mouth. It was using its teeth. There was a snarling sound. It was the noise of frustration. It was the noise of hunger. And then, let's see. Jesus Christ, I shouted out. Thank you, finally. Finally, he calls out to God for some help, right? Pray. Again, it's the same thing in every book, in every movie. They're being haunted by some demon, right? And they never cry out to God and pray. Just do it. He gets to his safe, and Jane had removed all the bullets from the gun after the night she thought it had imagined an intruder had broken into the house. Dumb bitch. I mean, excuse my language. Why did she do that? Right? Although maybe she's not so dumb because the guy is obviously insane. Yes. The house was struck with light. The electricity had come on at exactly 2:40 a.m. That's the time his dad died. Fast forward to, okay. So then he goes and he goes back to his childhood home. Okay. And of course this is in his vision, but in the book, it's literal. And he sees that the room is exactly like his son's room. So he is his son. Right. And he finds, some things he had written when he was young. And one thing is a short story called The Tomb. And he's talking to himself. Why did you write the story? Because I was so scared all the time. What were you so scared of? My father. What did the monster in the story look like, Bret? It looked like it was in our house tonight. It was identical to what I had imagined at 12. So he realizes that he's reliving exactly what he had imagined his lived trauma when he was young. Right. And, it broke into the homes of families because it wanted to eat the KIDS. I asked the writer, why is it appearing manifesting itself on Elsinore Lane? A brief period of consciousness. And he checks into a hotel. Oh, okay, here we go. Page 326. This is what vindicates my thesis that all this is real and that it's real in the sense that it's true and did happen to him, but it's not real in the sense that I don't think he's going through this with his family, or maybe he is, and he's just dissociating, right? And he's reliving this thing that he went through when he was young. And that is the thing that occurred. And it says, as Marta helped the kids to bed, I remember discussing The Tomb once with a psychologist my parents had sent me to when I was a teenager. Okay, here we go. What was the mound of hair? Why did the orifice have teeth? Why was a lightsaber nearing the mound of hair? Why was the little BOI screaming, shoot it? Because that's exactly what he went through. Now do you see the imagery? Now do you see what he went through when he was young? Right? The monster is a manifestation of the real thing that occurred when he was young. He had typed the words unknowingly, ghost, haunting, and exorcist. Okay, at this point, he reaches out to this guy, Robert Miller, he's like a character in Poltergeist. He's like a dude wearing, he's like a boomer. He's like a based boomer. Okay. And he's wearing like all denim. He doesn't describe him as having like a turquoise one of those turquoise Indian necklaces, but he probably does have that. He says he's a demonologist and a psychic researcher, and he tells him he's way in over his head. What he needs is a priest, right? He asks if he's ever had a psychotic episode. He tells Bret that he's seen people burst into flames. And anyway, he gets the guy to basically fumigate his house, and they do a bunch of, ghost hunting. But then later on, as he said in the first chapter, that guy disappeared. On page, on page 344, Robert Miller is the one who basically solves a lot of his deep psychic problems, because he tells him that, about talking backwards, backmasking, and he tells him about why Bret and Turby. He tells him about how he lives at 307 Elsinore Lane, and that's his birthday, is March 7th. And he says the house is not the source, because Bret's like, well, what if I just moved out of the house with my family and moved somewhere else? He says, not going to work, because that's not the source of the pain. You are. And he gives him $30,000 to do this stuff to his house. Bret starts speaking in third person voices and second. Here he is in the second person on page 356 again. You just said it. Get rid of it. You were standing in one place. You weren't aware of anything. You didn't admit that the words you'd whispered made the thing dissolve into ash. You were thinking that you would come back later in the afternoon. You were thinking of burning the house down. Burning the house down because he asked him, was your dad cremated? He says, I was going to reorganize myself. Mr. Ellis, are you here with us? So he sees him dissociating, right? Then he goes on to talk about a Vicodin binge. He went home and he pulled out the first copy that he wrote of American Psycho, and he sees like a face, just like the face on the Turby he'd seen, and he sees the words "I'm back" scrawled in the page. Okay, page 367. He's at home and he finds a book that he read when he was young, and it's called a book that he wrote, an illustrated book I'd written when I was 7. The title was The Toy Bret. I slowly reached down to pick up the title page, but stopped when I saw the tip of a black triangle. Illuminate, confirm. And I was confronted with the wrecked stare of the Turby. As I moved the pages around, I saw the Turby replicated 100 times throughout the book I had written 30 years ago. The Turby emerging from a coffin. The Turby taking a bath. The Turby nibbling the white petal of a flower. The Turby drinking a glass of milk. The Turby attacking the dog. The Turby entering the dog and making it fly. So he decides that one of the things he needs to do to purge himself of this is to write a story where he kills off Patrick Bateman. So he does. He writes a short story, and the last image is of Patrick Bateman stands on a burning pier. Right, he's on a burning pier because he is going out to the oblivion of sea, and the sea is also a mirror, right, where he will fade into the extreme endpoint, and he will burn. Right, he will commit him to ashes, just like the ashes that walk through his house and the ashes of his dead father. Was it his fault he had abandoned his soul? He hears a voice speak to him, and he confronts this demon, and he says, "Who are you?" And the demon says, "I'm everyone." On page 371, he says the house has changed and he became someone else. Then he's going through the house and it seems to be fine, but he finds a nest with some eggs, and he realizes it's the Gnostic eggs of this demon Turby. And the monster is hiding there. Then there's a horrible scene. We're getting towards the climax here. There's a horrible scene where he sees the dog. The dog is vomiting, lifting its head. He lifts the tail of the dog, and he sees the bottom half of the Turby hanging out of the dog, which is obviously an image for inversion of him as a child. I was pretending to be invisible, he says, but he confronts the demon. He sees on the face of this demon two faces. He sees the face of his dad and the face of Bateman, which are his altars. He ends up killing it, and he says, and then it says, disappear here. He goes outside, he gets in his car, he drives, he gets hit by the 450 SL. He goes into a coma. He wakes up in the hospital, and there's no witnesses that say he was hit by anybody, but that he just ran into a tree. He says he's lost in the mercy flow of the morphine drip. And then his son has disappeared. And are we to think that his son ran away, that he killed him, or actually he killed this demon, which was himself, and then there is no son? So he leaves his wife. He goes off, and he's himself now. And then at the end of the book, he becomes an addict again, and he retreats back into writing. But there is a 4 or 5 page race to the end of the book in one of the most beautiful. I'm not going to read it, but it's one of the most beautiful passages. It's an amazing climax to this book. My son, who was dreaming about the moon, and in his dream, they darkened its surface as they flew across it. But once they passed by, the moon was brighter than it had ever been. They were soon overtaken by a vision of light in which the images began to crumble. So he's clearing his own self of what has happened to him, right? From those of us who are left behind, you will be remembered. You were the one I needed. I loved you in my dreams. His whole book, he states, is about finding love, right? He wants to be able to love himself. So if you should see my son, tell him I say hello, be good, that I'm thinking of him, and that I know he's watching me over me somewhere, and not to worry. Watching over me like the moon, right? Lunar Park. That he can always find me here whenever he wants, right here, my arms held out and waiting in the pages behind the covers at the end of Lunar Park. And that's it. So he's reached the end of his psychic trauma, meta-narrative, mock-memoir, satire, realism vision. And, I think that this is a statement on I think that this book is a statement on the terror of modernity and the price of degradation and depravity. Right. Of course, he hasn't really cleared anything because he retreats back into the lifestyle that he had. But if he could only find true salvation, right? But again, I think this is his story, and that's it, you guys. What'd you think? What'd you think of that? Pretty hardcore book, right? Again, we covered that was Lunar Park by Bret Easton Ellis, and it's really a fantastic book. I mean, it's a true page turner, and I'll be interested to read his newest book, The Shards. And it's in my opinion, it's my favorite Bret Easton Ellis. It's way better than Rules of Attraction or Less Than Zero. I actually don't really like those books that much, but I do appreciate them for what they are, but I wasn't taken in by them. I didn't like them as much as I liked this book. Because this book works on so many levels. The Hamlet level, the Shining level, the meta narrative, the postmodern statement about the anxiety of the present. Not that I agree with those things. I'm just saying that they capture it well, right? So that's about all I got, you guys. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to Mixkey and Ellie and Kristen, Ratsky, Natesky, Thomas Henderson, all my based friends out there. Appreciate y'all. I don't know what we're going to have coming up next. But we'll see. I'm just checking to see if I got any other PayPals or Cash Apps or anything. Again, if you guys want to support me, don't hesitate to to drop me some fat coin there. As always, I really appreciate you. Thank you for being here. I hope everybody's having a good weekend, or as good as they can, and a nice Sunday. And let's see, we've got Jay coming up, I guess, tomorrow night with Dune analysis, etc. So that'll be fun. Let's see, maybe an analysis of the not gonna do it senior 1,000 points of light speech. That would be interesting. I should look at that. I should look at the text of that entire speech and think about doing that, Mixie. That's not a bad suggestion. Thomas Henderson has a long weekend there in Canada, so that's cool. Good for you. Good for you, homeboy. Hope you're relaxing and taking it easy with friends and family. Let's see. Somebody just dropped something. Let's check this out real quick. I don't know what I'm going to read next. I'm thinking of maybe doing. There we go. Our homegirl Kristen. Shouts out to our homegirl Kristen at Slow Boy Whiteboard. Everybody subscribe to her channel. Always and continuous based content that we love. She drops $5. Appreciate you, Kristen. Thank you so much. Always supporting me out there. So I don't know what I'm going to cover next, but I was thinking of doing something completely different, which would be, I don't know. Let me know if you guys think this is a good idea or not. But I was thinking of doing something sort of geopolitical, but it's just pure autobiography, and that is the book Will by G. Gordon Liddy. By gold. If you've never read that, maybe I'll do it. Because it's a really interesting book, and he covers a lot. And, obviously we get Watergate and all that stuff. And I think that, it's not literature like we've been doing, but it's a fun autobiography. And we haven't really done that so much. Although this book was autobiographical in nature, I suppose. And we've done Emerson. We've talked about Ralph Waldo Emerson. We've done some streams on Emerson, Thoreau, and some other sort of quasi autobiographical works. Let's see. And we've zoomed past 10K views here now. We're going to get up to 11K soon. And hope, I keep getting subs. Please let everybody about the channel. Tell them to sub, and hopefully we can get up to 1,000. That'll be cool. What else? I don't know what. If I can find Don DeLeo's White Noise, I want to do that. I got a community tab now too. I got to think about what I want to put in it. Let's see. G. Gordon Liddy's Will. What else? I'm not sure. Something will come to me. I'm sure something will come to me about what to cover next. Yeah, we need to get up to 1,000 so we can get those super chats going while we do this. But I guess we'll just decide as we go about what to do next. So, if you got any suggestions, don't hesitate to put them in the comments. Don't forget to smash that like. And let's see. Did we get one more? It's Ratsky. Rats Platigan. Thank you. Who donates $5. He says, did you ever read Infinite Jest? Yeah, I've read Infinite Jest. David Foster Wallace. Infinite Jest, title from Hamlet. You guys, I'm sure everybody knows that. I've read Infinite Jest. I'm not sure if I'm going to cover Infinite Jest. But if you want me to, that would be a good suggestion. Sort of a magnum opus from Wallace. And something, a statement on postmodernism. But I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, thank you for the suggestion, Ratsky. Appreciate you, homie. Let's see. Anybody else? Anybody else got anything? Okay, guys, I guess that's about it. Thank y'all for being here with me for this good 2-hour Sunday afternoon stream. I thought it was fun. And, that was a fun book. Again, Lunar Park by Bret Easton Ellis. Maybe I'll consider doing one of his other books. I'm not sure. I know that Jay is doing Melville's Confidence Man coming up, so I look forward to that. Oh, also check out if you guys didn't catch it, check out Tristan's stream on Demons by Dostoevsky. Great stream. He went really, really hard, really in depth on that, and talking about the minds of men. So that was a great stream. High IQ, as always. Our homeboy Tristan over at Primal Edge Health. Check that out. And yeah, I guess that's about it, guys. I will see y'all later. Thanks again, and everybody have a good weekend and a good Sunday. So peace. Love y'all. Peace.